Welcome to the HigherEdJobs Podcast. I'm Andy Hibble, the Chief Operating Officer and one of the co-founders of HigherEdJobs.
And I'm Kelly Sherwin, the Director of Editorial Strategy. Today, we're joined by Dr. Angel Pérez, CEO of the National Association for College Admission Counseling, often referred to as NACAC, and we'll be having a conversation about the current and future state of college admissions, the evolving role of enrollment leadership, and what access means in higher ed today. Dr. Pérez is a nationally recognized leader in higher education and a leading voice on college admissions and student access. As CEO of NACAC, he represents more than 28,000 admission and counseling professionals and serves as a key voice in shaping national conversations around enrollment, policy, and access. Before joining NACAC, he held senior leadership roles across higher ed, most recently as Vice President for Enrollment and Student Success at Trinity College. He's also the author of The Hottest Seat on Campus, a roadmap for mastering leadership in college admission, which discusses the realities of admission leadership. Angel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So, Angel, before we get into the full set of the question, I just wanted to have you give us a little bit of your background and discuss your background in the mission of NACAC and also what fuels your passion to lead the association.
I guess I'll start with my background because it's very much related to why I do this work. It is my passion and connected to my story. I was a first-generation college student. I grew up low income, first in Puerto Rico and then in the projects of the South Bronx in New York City, and had this incredible opportunity to go to college on a full scholarship because a high school counselor who had 700 kids in her caseload stopped me in the hallway of my high school and said, "Young man, have you ever thought about going to college?" And the answer at that time was no, I had not thought about going to college. I didn't have anyone in my family that went to college. It wasn't something that I saw on television growing up at that time in the early 90s. And so, just a tap on the shoulder really moved me in an entirely different direction. And this counselor who supported me through the process, and then this wonderful admissions officer who came to my school and painted a picture of what life could be like on a college campus. And so I went to college, had a wonderful transformative experience, and eventually became an admissions officer. And I thought I was going to do that for 1 year until I got a real job because, I didn't realize that people on college campuses have real jobs. When you're a student, you don't think that way. And 28 years later, here I am. I spent most of my career in higher education, as you noted in the beginning, and I am about to start my 7th year as NACAC CEO and just, passionate to be leading this organization whose mission is to empower college admission counseling professionals through education, advocacy, and community. So we are the largest professional association for college access professionals around the world. We do a lot of advocacy, especially here in Washington, D.C., where we are located, to try to make sure that there's as much access to higher education as possible. But also a lot of education, training, conferences, so on and so forth. So it's a phenomenal opportunity and a privilege for me to do this work, especially at this critical moment in our history.
Thank you for sharing, Angel. I believe it's important to kind of have that history and your lived experience in this conversation, because I really do think there's going to be a huge thread of a lot of the topics we cover that your personal and your professional really kind of offer a unique view. But we're going to jump right in with the two biggies along with admissions currently, which is affordability and access. You've been part of national conversations about college access and affordability, including advising at the federal level. When you look ahead, where do you see opportunities for furthering access and helping affordability?
I think we're at a really pivotal moment in our history. I don't think I have to tell our listeners and our viewers all of the challenges that we are currently facing and the challenges that higher education and college access professionals are facing. But I do think there is incredible opportunity here. I think if there's one thing we can probably all agree on is there is an incredible hunger for change. I think we continue to move into a space where we are rethinking the way that higher education is funded in this country. We all know that education across all sectors, K through 12 and higher education, is deeply underfunded. And so that's one area where I think we have an incredible amount of opportunity. Right now we have a lot of challenges with this current administration in getting more funding for higher education, but it doesn't mean that there's not a lot of opportunity at the state level and that there's a lot of opportunity moving into the years ahead. I also think there's big change coming. The reality of the matter is higher education is at this inflection point. I think the public has spoken, and there's a lot of mistrust. And I think we have some trust building that we have to do. And part of that trust building has to be centered around affordability, not just what we offer in our classrooms, but also how do we make it affordable for students? How do we make sure that we can deliver education to our students that's quality education, and at the same time be able to make it affordable? And so I do think colleges and universities, our colleagues on campuses, they are having those conversations. They are wrestling with those issues. And it's not easy. I say that as someone who worked on a college campus for over 20 years. I understand how challenging it is to make it affordable because higher education is not it's not a cheap product. It's a very expensive product. However, I think we're at a turning point, and so I'm excited about the kinds of opportunities that do lie ahead.
Thank you so much for that, Angel. So speaking of conversations on campus, I want to discuss so for some people who are outside of missions, they may not realize everything that goes into the role. It involves strategy, revenue, and a lot of internal decision making. So, what should faculty, student affairs professionals, and maybe others on campus better understand about how the work that they do connects to admissions, and also what enrollment leaders may be navigating every day?
Or to answer that last part of the question, what enrollment leaders are navigating every day, we'd be here for like 3 hours. But I'm glad you brought this up because when I was on a campus, I was actually infamous for saying it takes a village to recruit a class and it takes a village to enroll a class. Everyone is an admissions officer. Yes, you have the admissions office who is leading the efforts across campus. But the reality of the matter is students want to go to college because they are interested in the work professors are doing. They are interested in the work that, staff are doing. They want to know what current students are doing and the kind of things that they're engaged in. And so everyone has a role to play in making sure that when students come to visit, that they feel welcome. That when students come to visit, they have a clear understanding of what the culture and the academic offerings are going to be. And so, whether you're a student affairs professional, whether you are a faculty member, or whether you work in the dining hall where you are serving food to students, everyone has a role to play in making students feel welcome on this particular campus. And the reality is the role of enrolling students has become more complex than ever. The headwinds are extraordinary. We have, a demographic cliff that has already taken place, which means that we have fewer students in the pipeline to higher education because they just weren't born about 18 years ago. And so that is just, demographics don't lie, and it's a challenge that we have. One of the things that enrollment officers were doing to mitigate some of this is for years, admission teams have worked to recruit international students across the world. And given our current political climate, it's getting more and more challenging to enroll international students. And so that is yet another lever that admission officers do not have. We also have, as we sort of alluded to in the beginning of the podcast, extraordinary headwinds from the public and a distrust in higher education, and more people thinking, is it worth it? Should I be investing this kind of money? Which is a significant investment in higher education. And the competition is extremely steep, right? We have thousands of colleges and universities across the country. Students have many, many choices. And so to be an enrollment officer, an admissions officer today, whose job is to enroll the right amount of students and to bring in the right amount of revenue that is needed for the institution to operate with the right amount of demographics that's going to meet all of the different needs across the campus, right? We need enough people to be in the chemistry department, and we need enough people to fill the School of Communications, and so on and so forth. It is an extraordinarily complex role. I remember a former vice president for academic affairs at one of my institutions where I used to work. She used to describe my job as having to land a jumbo jet on a tiny runway every single year. That was my job. As she thought about all of the different things that I was responsible for. And I have a deep amount of empathy, not just because I did that work, but because it's getting harder every single year. And the job is so public. One of the things about this role, VPs of enrollment, as one of my colleagues says in the book that I wrote, there is nowhere to hide in this role. Everybody knows whether you succeeded this year or you didn't succeed. And that's very different from other roles on college campuses. How do you measure the success of a vice president for student affairs? How do you measure the success of a dean of faculty? Very different than the concrete numbers. The enrollment deed either made the numbers or didn't make the numbers. It's a lot of pressure.
And the pilots landing that plane are making decisions based on an 18-year-old brain.
Oh, I used to joke all the time, Andy, with my friends. I must be crazy to take on a job where my success is dependent on the whims of 18-year-olds. We all know 18-year-olds and their decisions can be all over the place. And so in addition to all the external factors, you have the emotions of 18-year-olds, which really are the deciding, they're the ones who are making the decisions ultimately to enroll.
As the conversation's also evolved over the past few decades, the idea of, particularly for students who are going to be on campus and engaging in that campus community, that just kind of re-emphasize the welcome side of it. From an advancement, I was a development officer at a college or university. That's exactly the same thing. Every chance of interaction of that welcoming is there, because at the end of the day, what students are they're going to get their education, they're going to have their experience. But feeling part of that community and feeling like they belong, everybody has a role to play in it. And more importantly, unfortunately, sometimes we're judged when you don't feel part of the community or you feel othered. And when you feel othered or not part of the community, it takes a lot to rebuild that trust as an institution. It's so imperative that everybody understand that we all have a role, and each finger respect the value of the other fingers, and understand that we need the entire hand to be working together in that effort. Such an important point that I think people sometimes think that everything is siloed on a campus. This particular thing cannot be siloed. That will absolutely make campus life a lot more difficult.
Truth is, there's research now that shows that, belonging is number one in terms of why students enroll and why students stay, even more importantly, right? Students stay and retain on college campuses because they feel a deep sense of belonging. And it is all of our jobs on a college campus to make that happen. The other thing I would share, and I write about this in the book as well, is I am a firm believer, actually, that colleges and universities need to move further into building cultures of hospitality on their campus. This is a controversial thing I'm going to say, but I believe it to my core. Many colleges and universities are inching up towards charging $100,000 a year in tuition and fees. You are absolutely in the business of hospitality, because if you are going to pay that, think about, what do we spend $400,000 on? Let's say your child stays for 4 years. The only thing we spend that kind of money on is probably a house, right? And so when people are making that kind of investment, they are now expecting a very different kind of service. And I think many institutions haven't moved towards a culture of hospitality. I used to say on my campus at Trinity when I was there, and I did some training in hospitality and tried to build that culture into my team and my campus, that I can't beat institutions with more endowment and revenue and scholarship dollars, I can't beat them on that, but I can beat them on how I make students feel when they arrive on my campus. So I'm a firm believer in Maya Angelou's quote, people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they will always remember how you made them feel. And one of the secret recipes of success in enrollment is about how you make students feel when they come to your campus.
That's spot on. And I'd also ask some of those leaders that are pondering that when we buy a house, we're judged whether or not we're creditworthy and whether or not we can afford the house.
Yeah.
When you're asking an 18-year-old to make a decision that is basically the equivalent to getting a giant mortgage before they know anything about what their earning potential is or who they want to be, if you box them in that there's only certain positions they can take to service the debt that they create to go to your institution, I really, really need to think hard and long about what your responsibility is to that young adult, that emerging adult in their life, if this is the trajectory you're putting them on.
I think that's part of, I love that you brought that up because I think that if we can do that, that's one other way of rebuilding the trust, right? I think there's been so much trust lost between higher education and society. And it's not just because of what you hear on the news, but it's things like that, right? That I think we need to be more transparent. We also need to give students clear pathways to help them understand, if you take this on, what does this mean for the future? As opposed to just thinking about our own revenue, which is real. And the pressure is real around making sure that you make revenue at a college campus. But I don't think it's mutually exclusive. You can, both serve students well and also make sure that you're economically viable on your campus.